The recent TV series Mrs. Bates versus the Post Office has shone a light on the appalling scandal involving the Post Office and sub-postmasters. The scandal revolves around the Post Office's use of an IT system known as Horizon. More than 900 sub-postmasters were wrongly prosecuted due to problems in the Horizon software. Many lost substantial amounts of money, and in total 3,500 sub-postmasters were wrongly accused. We can look at some of the economic aspects of this case. I think there are probably 6 relevant economic points to make here. The first point relates to the ambiguous status of the sub-postmasters. A sub-postmaster is someone who runs their own retail business, which hosts a post office facility on their site. They're not directly employed by the post office. They're treated as if they're self-employed, similar to a franchise type arrangement. However, postmasters are in fact under the control of the post office and integrated into the post office's business. They have the illusion of having their own business, but they seem to be more in a grey area between being self-employed franchisees and being employees of the post office. This ambiguity in economic and legal status seems to be part of the problem here. This brings us to the second point, the unfair arrangement between the post office and the sub-postmasters. What was particularly unfair about this arrangement was a provision in the contract that made the postmasters liable for any losses. The contract stated that the operator shall be fully liable for any loss of or damage to any post office cash and stock, however this occurs. Despite the fact that they were not operating as an independent business, they were required to assume liability for any losses, even losses caused by mistakes at the post office end. The terms were unbalanced and unfair. I haven't gone through all the details of the arrangements and rulings. However, I did notice in one of the rulings that the court raised a possible issue with the way the sub-postmasters are paid. The judge said that the post office would only, for the first year, pay an incoming sub-postmaster 75% of what ordinarily otherwise be paid. The judge went on to say the rationale or economic justification for this is not entirely clear, but it was effectively a payment from the sub-postmaster to the post office. Even though legally the sub-postmasters are not employees, part of their payment still effectively seems to work like a salary. This financial provision described by the court is like an employee having 25% of their salary taken back in the first year. The court notes how the post office says that the payment is to reflect uncertainty and risk, but that it was not clear what the risk was. In fact, the liability provisions means that the sub-postmasters were contractually obliged to take a disproportionate share of the risk, even for things in the control of the post office. I personally think that there are questions about the desirability of franchises as businesses generally. I think it's the franchise holder that holds the real value of the brand and gets paid for that without taking very much risk. However, in this case, the arrangement was even worse. It effectively had elements that completely ripped off the postmasters, probably in a way that a private company could not. But because the post office is 100% government owned, somehow these rip-off terms were allowed to exist. The third point relates to corporate governance and accountability in arm's length bodies. The post office is 100% government owned, yet it's not under direct government control. It's set up as an arm's length body. In my opinion, there are too many of these arm's length bodies. They're such a convenient arrangement for politicians. If things go wrong, the politicians can cover their backsides. This scandal indicates a major lack of accountability compared to if the post office was under direct government control. I think that this episode raises serious questions about the way in which these arm's length bodies work in terms of their accountability and decision making. The role of the government here is disgraceful. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak said, "This is one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history." However, the ITV drama actually contained nothing new. The issues have been well reported over the past decade in the British press and media. The miscarriage of justice was definitively confirmed in 2019 when the High Court ruled that Horizon was to blame. Yet the government seems to have remained quiet on the issue then. How is the government not at least partially responsible for this, even if, for nothing else, the delay in the government intervening? It's effectively taken a soap opera for Rishi Sunak to change his mind. As I say, this shows a major flaw in this system of arm's length bodies, and it shows how ministers were sticking their head in the sand because they could claim responsibility lay elsewhere. The fourth point relates to oversight and accountability of new technology. The problem here is that a really expensive bit of technology was purchased, and when it became clear that there were problems in the software, the negative implications for the business by admitting the mistake were just too big, even if that meant covering up the problem and letting the wrong people get blamed. It emphasises the need for robust oversight and accountability in the implementation of technology within public services. It's not going to be long before we're all speaking to artificial intelligence when we call a helpline, and it may be the AI that's making important decisions on behalf of whoever we're calling. This is a scary thought. The fifth point relates to the role of collective action and protest. Justice only came about because the victims of the scandal came together to take collective action through the Justice for Sub-Postmasters Alliance. It shows how organising and protesting can be really effective. It's clear from the ITV drama that without the dogged persistence of this group of sub-postmasters, the scandal would never have reached the stage that it has. We just cannot rely on corporations or politicians to do the right thing. Sad. The sixth point relates to the archaic legal framework we have in this country. The Post Office is granted certain legal immunities and powers regulated by laws and regulations that reflect its historical connection to the Crown. So much of our political system contains anachronisms, and these should all be rooted out and changed. This doesn't make good economic law. In conclusion, this is a terrible story. Thousands of people were wrongly accused, yet were unable to prove their innocence for 20 years. I don't think the culture that caused this is unique to the Post Office. We live in an economic system where the powerful have undue influence and vested interests are able to protect themselves using fair means and foul. I hope you found this information useful. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing. I would really appreciate that. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.